What is the impact here of having Discord versus not having Discord?
A Discord user is 6 times more valuable than a non-Discord user. Their players, their users are the people that are putting hands in wallets. They're kind of the super fans who are really investing.
Today's playbook is with Tom Gayner, CEO of Levellr, who's helped Crafton, Scopely, and even the NFL turn Discord into an asset and improves game time, retention, and sales.
You get users in, but ultimately the real job is keep them engaged and ultimately keep spending. Discord is where that kind of hardcore player exists.
What are they usually getting wrong when it comes to their Discord community?
The people that are doing this best are when they're not only creating the, hey, you can now speak to me, but how can I also foster a space where the players are starting to talk and engage with each other? Because that can lead to some real goals coming out of it. There's so much content out there. I think there was 19,000 games on Steam last year. And that doesn't even bring into the fact that 60% of game time is from titles that are 5 years or older. You're not only competing with so much new content, you're competing with old. Your goal as a business has to be to keep those players and keep them playing over and over and over again.
What needs to be in place before we start looking at launching a Discord?
I think this really depends upon...
Today's playbook is with Tom Gayner, CEO of Levellr, who's helped Crafton, Scopely, and even the NFL turn Discord into an asset and improves game time, retention, and sales. And we're going to get into everything community on today's playbook. So a few things we're going to cover for people at home, biggest mistakes studios are making when it comes to their Discord communities, how to turn players into a loyal, self-sustaining community, how to monetize and prove the return on investment with all that effort, and then a step-by-step Discord strategy that people can take away after this call. Alrighty. Tom, we were speaking before the podcast. I'd love to start with this. So I feel like most studios know Discord is kind of important, but then many still don't actually use it. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? Why is that the case?
I think that, historically, the industry has kind of had two different levers to focus on kind of the user acquisition piece, which has been advertising, which has worked extremely well over the last decade. And as we know, there have been large budgets and focus and big businesses built around the user acquisition space. And then secondly, I think the kind of growth of social media platforms, which really haven't ended up so much themselves as community platforms, but more as kind of broadcast media platforms. And, I suppose part of the reason, Harry, that we ended up building our business in Levellr and we felt that community platforms like Discord were going to become so key was, everything's pretty cyclical when it comes to kind of platforms. And, when you and I were growing up, we were on web-based forums and chat groups. That's where that conversation used to take place. And that then quickly shifted into social media platforms, right? And in the early days of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, it was conversational. There was community there. But what we started to see kind of 3-4 years ago when we were building this business was that those platforms were shifting really to broadcast media formats, short form content, algorithmic scrolling, kind of top of funnel, and not really the place for conversation and connection. And what we're seeing is that cyclical nature come back to play, where actually the vacuum is for platforms like Discord and Reddit, and we're seeing in other industries, WhatsApp and Telegram also growing for that kind of community connection piece. And I think particularly in gaming, there has been such a kind of decade-long bull run around growth that the industry has been fortunate that it's kind of been able to throw $1 into the user acquisition advertising pot and spit $2 or $3 back out. And so many businesses have just focused on the UA piece. And I think that is starting to shift. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into some of the data and some of the challenges that the industry is facing at the moment, but we are seeing a flatline for the first time in a long time within the industry. And so community retention, re-engagement is really starting to come under the spotlight. So I think that the role that the community is playing within these businesses is changing, Harry. And I think the C-suite in particular are starting to think differently about the value and importance of community. But the reason that some haven't lent in, I think historically, is because the business has been able to have success on UA, and that's in some quarters perceived as easier as maybe focusing on the kind of pure retention and re-engagement piece.
Sweet. I feel like I guess because you haven't had to, I guess it's just not been on the forefront. But now you're like, all right, we need to find new ways to do what you said. And it's like, oh, okay, what's that Discord thing again? And then it's kind of re-entering the conversation, if I got that right.
Well, and too often you find that, I mean, two things. A, often, community teams aren't invested into enough. And secondly, that community teams themselves aren't focusing enough or telling a good enough story of the value and the commercial value, right? Not just the value of engaging with our customers, but this is why this is so important for the business, and being able to put kind of ROI and numbers against that. And again, I think that is now starting to change.
Alrighty. So before we dive into like what people should be doing, what are the best doing, what are people maybe not doing so well, you mentioned numbers. I'm wondering, like, could we get something tangible here to brace people for the conversation? Like, what is the impact here of having Discord versus not having Discord? Like, do you have any top of kind of average numbers that people can take into account?
Yes. So, I mean, I think so. The first piece is kind of on the importance of the platform, and we talked about why Discord has started to kind of enter into the vacuum that social media platforms kind of haven't learned into, which is that conversation and the connection piece. And so Discord kind of organically started to really grow as the place for gamers to go and talk and connect with other players around their games. Um, and originally the business wasn't focused on building kind of large community spaces, which now most publishers and studios have in place. I think the original cap of total users you could have in a community on Discord was about 50. And many people, listening to this will know that, seeing the growth of Marvel Rivals and over three and a bit million people, and Mid-Journey and the size of those communities on the platform now. So that's kind of organically happened. Um, the platform today has 200 million monthly average users. On average, gamers are playing 14 times a month, and they're playing for an average 90 hours a month, which is pretty extraordinary, right? So this is a really hardcore, highly engaged audience. And that on the one hand is obviously creating a focus and a lean in from the industry, particularly at a moment where there are distribution challenges. We're moving to a moment of kind of atomized audiences. And so, Discord kind of fills a bit of a void there. And then the piece that we're trying to kind of pull together on top is, okay, so clearly this is a platform that you need to be on because this is where your players and gamers exist. But what is the value of that to you and to your business? And that's been quite hard to quantify so far. What is the dollar value of a user on Discord? How much game time are you driving from those players? What does engagement look like with your community? And then kind of crucially, how do you turn all of that conversation and all of that engagement, which is really real time, right? Like, think about the core differences between Discord and Reddit. Reddit is kind of, that kind of follow on conversation. You can go back and read through and scroll. I mean, Discord is really kind of fast paced. There is so much insight and gold to be mined from that. But actually, like, turning that and, needle in a haystack, like, how do you find that gold and get it to product teams, development teams, player insights teams, player experience, community teams? And that's kind of the piece that we're trying to come in and really build around. And, some of the numbers are pretty interesting. We'd be able to prove for a few customers that on average a Discord user is 6 times more valuable than a non-Discord user, right? Their players, their users are the people that are putting hands in wallets. They're kind of the super fans who are really investing. So that's kind of, from a core data point of view, platform users are highly engaged. And then the piece that we're trying to fix is showing you, your specific users, how they fit into kind of your ecosystem and then how engaged those users are.
Interesting. So 6x return if you take a player into Discord and they stay engaged, I guess, on average. So, of course, some people were already spending that much, but like if your goal is to, I guess, increase the revenue per user, just getting them to Discord and keeping them engaged there, which isn't easy, but if that is done, sounds like it just makes number go up, from what I understand.
Right, you're trying to drive long-term fandom, and that's where you ultimately drive that. If you think about that kind of classic funnel, you get users in, but ultimately the real job is to then keep those users and keep them coming back and keep them engaged and ultimately keep them spending. And Discord is where that kind of hardcore player exists. So yeah, getting them in and keeping them engaged is part of the challenge, but the platform naturally kind of feeds into that, because what you are creating is then a two-way conversation. So that user, not only starts to feel like they are part of the journey. I mean, they literally are, right? Some of the best communities that we see are when a voice is genuinely given to those users. They become part of the creative process, right? Historically, Harry, we've, as businesses, kind of created products for our users, and we're moving into a really interesting time and moment where the best games and the best brands are starting to not create for, but with their users. And that really changes the dynamic. It makes people not only feel a part of it, but they are going to want to go on the journey with you. They are going to become your evangelists. And we're seeing an interesting trend at the moment where, clearly the creator ecosystem has really grown out over the last 2 years, and gaming has leaned in really heavily here. And, companies like Supercell and others have built really powerful kind of creator and influencer programs. But what we're also now seeing is, Discord is where your street team exists. Those are the people in there that are kind of going and banging the drum and shouting about your game. And so we're now starting to see, some of our customers are using our data on who are the most engaged users to sort of convert those people into those kind of influencer and creator and partner programs, because it is that kind of really highly engaged user that wants to be a part of what you are building.
So if I have a product which I'm building, I'm kind of doing it in public, it's, let's say, about to be on beta on Steam, and I do not have Discord running, or I have it, like, where do people come to you in that situation? Like, what are they usually getting wrong when it comes to their Discord communities?
So if we think about the life cycle of a game, there are different values and problems that community and Discord as a platform can fix depending upon where you are in your game's life cycle. And what we've really started to see over the last couple of years is games pre-launch leaning into Discord. And there's two core reasons that they're leaning in. One is product iteration feedback, really fast feedback loops from early players that want to kind of, be a part of that game's journey. And the second then is mobilization. So how do you start to drive more people onto Steam wish lists, get people purchasing or starting to play that game once it's actually live? How do you start to impact some of the algorithms on some of those platforms and mobilize that core audience to do that? So there are those kind of two things to think about at the kind of beta stage and in the testing phase. Um, we've seen different approaches here, and some of our customers use us for kind of access control, so they can make sure that only specific users can get access to the community. If you have existing games and an existing portfolio, you've already got an audience that you can go and try and speak to and try and make them a part of this new game's early testing phase. If you are launching from scratch, then you may have to do some UA and some advertising to try and get people into that community. But what you're trying to ultimately create is two different types of conversations. So me as the studio, I can start talking with you as the player, and I can get your direct feedback, and you are also going to be speaking directly at me about what's working, what's not working, what you want to see next. But what you also ideally want to be able to see as a studio is the conversation between players, because that's that kind of, you know, people sat at a bar or sat at a pub or sat at a restaurant having that conversation. That's often where really interesting stuff falls out as just part of that organic conversation that you might not always get if somebody is either giving you a ticket or giving you that direct feedback. So the people that are doing this best are when they're not only creating the, hey, you can now speak to me, the game builder, and I can speak to you, but how can I also foster a space where the players are starting to talk and engage with each other, and they're starting to share ideas and they're starting to ideate, because that can lead to some real gold coming out of it.
So, what are the 3 things someone should do to foster more of that player-to-player conversation in the Discord?
So one is community architecture. So you need to think about how are you setting up your server to facilitate the right place for feedback and then the right place for the community to start speaking to each other. So just 101 is think about the channels that you're setting up and the architecture to encourage those conversations. I think the second thing is what's the value exchange? So just being clear on, you know, what is the value of the players starting to talk and kind of engage with each other? So um, is that, the game mechanics kind of feed into players needing to play with each other or matchmaking, or what is it that's going to get those players talking and engaging with each other? Just thinking about that and being intentional about it and not just expecting that to ultimately happen. And I think the third thing is then having somebody from the team that is ultimately part of a conversation, right? It's not just you know, here's our community, dive in. Like, you need to facilitate. And, I think the best communities are when ultimately you are sort of building the gate to Disneyland, right? But then with the players are building the theme parks together. But you've got to be part of that conversation with them still to encourage that and to foster that. So those are the 3 things that I'll ultimately be thinking about. How do you set up your server architecture properly? How do you kind of create that value exchange that encourages people to have the conversation? And how do you make sure that you've got the bandwidth and the investment from your side to lean in and to be part of that conversation with the players?
I'm thinking now, like, what do I need in place before I start? Because you mentioned being intentional about having features which will enable conversation. And I'm guessing there's a point where it's never going to be perfect. You still need to, like, in my head, launch the Discord, but you could always do something a bit better to kind of make it an even better experience. But I guess, is there a minimum requirement that we should be asking ourselves certain questions, like make sure, okay, we got this, this, and this, we're ready for Discord? Like, what needs to be in place before we start looking at launching the Discord? Let's say in the example where I already have a game, an indie studio, I have resources, and I don't have a Discord yet. Like, what should I be asking myself to make sure that I'm ready for it?
I think this really depends upon what stage you're at as a business and
We can
size
role
of
play.
business.
Imagine I'm a studio coming up to you.
So this is what we're seeing currently, right? Based on that question and where things are falling down. So often we find at a smaller stage studio or indie, the kind of community managers are often literally the founders, right? Or the product lead and game designer and head of publishing, and like early stage, often you find that the core leadership team that are literally building the game are in the trenches and talking to the community, and they really get that and realize how important that is. Then what we find sometimes is that if those games become successful and those guys grow and their team grows and funding grows, and obviously they then have a million things on their plates, and they can't necessarily lean in the way that they used to, but they haven't then either invested into a genuine community team or a full-time community team, um, or um, you know, community kind of starts to fall off the plate a little bit as kind of new problems and more challenges come up. You then run the risk of Discord just becoming a place where the engagement quickly falls off, and you're creating actually a bad experience for your users. So, what do you need in place to build a community? You've got to have people that are leaning in, and that doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a hire and a full time community manager. It could literally be the team that are in there and building it. But when you then get to that bigger size as a business, having a core team in there that can spend the time to invest. Because the other challenge that we see sometimes, Harry, is a kind of community person is given so many different platforms and area of focus that there is opportunity cost there because they end up doing nothing really well. So what are your core platforms, right? Discord may or may not be the right platform for your game, your audience. So either really lean in and do it properly and invest into it, or, you know, think about where your time can be better spent. The biggest challenges come when an organization tries to do everything but doesn't actually put the proper resources and time into fostering a genuine community that can be a success in the long term.
So you said putting in the resources. So we have resources of time from the founders, from my understanding, on the core team, but they're also like a actually core community management team. So if I'm in that state, let's say I decided, from what I understand, Discord is my platform. Do you have a recommendation? Like, what do you usually say? Like, what does commitment actually mean? Does that mean being online for a certain amount of time, like a certain amount of messages a week? Is it more of a mentality of like, we need to respond? Because you gave the example of like 3 million person server. Like, how many people does that take to manage? Because in my head, it's like, is that like a full-time job? Is that like a mini business at this point? So I'm wondering, like, when you say invest resources, what does it actually look like?
Right. I think the obviously that's going to depend upon the size of your community and the amount of engagement that's happening. But it comes with the core piece here is intention. So we are going to create a community where we have a calendar of events and we have a reason for people to come back. We're going to create a community where we let the community know that they're being heard and that we're listening to them. That does not mean responding to every single message. That is not sustainable. And to be clear, the best communities are when you're creating peer-to-peer connections, networking, conversations. So the community is not just about you and your relationship with the player. It's about creating a place for players to have connections and relationships with other players. That's such an important part of it, right? So um, it's going to depend on that kind of first piece of size of server and amount of engagement. But fundamentally, it is letting the community know that you are there, that you are listening, that you are responding, and that you are creating a space that makes them want to come back regularly and frequently. And that doesn't just happen by just spinning up a server, right? Some of the best games are in a fortunate position where they have such an engaged audience that their players start to become part of the community ecosystem and they start to create events and they start to drive the direction of community. And that's kind of the holy grail. But to get to that point, you've got to set the intention and show people that this is a place where that type of connection can take place. And then you will start to see things like that happen. And then if you can build the right guardrails around it, so you're keeping safety um, and ensuring it's still a healthy ecosystem, you'll start to see you can kind of flower out and create with your community. And that's where you really want to get to.
Amazing. Tom, I'm curious. How did we get here? Why are you spending your days, your nights traveling to conferences, kind of beating the drum of Discord community? Like, what happened before this?
Good question. Ultimately every startup has its own kind of origin story and how they ended up finding their core set of customers and problems. But the insight was this. So I've kind of been building communities for 10, 15 years earlier on in my career. My co-founder and CTO, Ben Barber-Smith, was at YouTube. So he was kind of building community over at Google. So we both had this shared kind of background of how do we bring users together around a shared topic, a shared interest, and ultimately how do we fuel that and how do we engage that kind of passion. And we were kind of reminiscing around the early days of fan forums and the enjoyment of kind of connecting with other players around games that we loved. And we felt that was really lost when social came around, and noticed the sort of shift that was starting to happen 4 years ago of kind of Discord communities and Reddit suddenly being on the radar a lot more. And so, as naturally inquisitive community builders, we just started to build communities on Discord, and for ourselves and for others, right? Like early on at Levellr, we were literally helping people with kind of community management and setting these things up and running them. And what we found was this incredible opportunity of getting people into one space that really love the thing that community is for, and then talking about that thing like all the time. And that is really, really powerful and doesn't happen in many other places across the kind of web. And we, off the back of that, felt that there were a number of questions that hadn't quite been answered. So the core insight with Discord is, this is where players tell us first, whether that's a change to game mechanics they do or don't like, whether there's a bug in the game, whether there's something that they really want, where they're chatting about a new DLC. That real-time conversation happens in Discord. And we were seeing this for our customers, and they were getting all of this feedback, but they were just finding it so hard to manually scroll through that to find really valuable data and then get that back into their teams. And when they were reporting that back in, we also found this challenge of kind of community teams putting together reports, sharing it within the organization, and the product teams often being, kind of the pushback was, how do I know that this is not one or two people being really loud? And why should I necessarily listen to that data? As a product team, we've got in-game data, so I can literally see what's happening with our players. But we really felt that kind of best in class game building and building longevity into games is when you can bring together that qualitative community feedback and the quantitative game data. And so, we've built kind of AI driven social listening where we can actually, not keyword based, which is historically how kind of businesses are built in this space. We can actually group together conversations. So I can see, rather than sending every bug message through to a product team, we can alert them if 20 people are speaking around one specific bug, because the LLM is smart enough to start to group those conversations together. So you're starting to get much kind of smarter and powerful community data. And then we've also built in integrations into PlayStation and Steam and Xbox and other platforms, so we can actually see what people are playing on Discord. And that gets you to a really exciting opportunity where, the peaks and troughs on game time, sessions that are being played, you can start to overlay that directly with the community conversation. And so, we felt that was an opportunity for us to go and build a product around, alongside the fact that customers were just saying, hey, look, how do I understand the value of this? What is the dollar value of these users? How much game time do I drive? And finally, how do I manage this, right? When everyone has a microphone, I've got 100,000, 500,000, million people. That's not easy. And so we felt there was an opportunity to build a product around kind of community insights, community engagement, and community management. And that led us to ultimately building the product and going on the journey of building Levellr.
Sweet. So you mentioned something really cool. You can group the bugs, the conversations together, and I'm guessing you can then score them, like how often it's happening. But that surely isn't recent. That probably wasn't around 4 years ago, unless I'm mistaken. Like, when did that shift happen where that's possible to use like AI to like group all those conversations together?
Yeah, I mean, we've built this over the last kind of, we've been thinking about it for a long time, but we've really only got the product to the point now over the last 6 months, and that's really been driven by the fast pace of
Yeah.
LLMs and their improvement. So what we were hearing previously from customers was, keywords don't really work long term, because yes, I can bash out 500 keywords, but what am I missing? So what are the trending topics in the community that I don't have keywords around? And I might miss that.
Yeah.
And then how do I go deeper below a keyword and not just see all the conversations around that, but group together the different topics and conversations around that? And how do I summarize that at scale, right? So even if, you can break down, here are the 200 kind of conversations around, a nerfed gun challenge, like we can then summarize that. And the LLMs have got super powerful here. So we can start to understand specific slang, sarcasm, context for your game. And every game has that different. So you can start to prompt the AI to make it unique to that game. And so you're getting much more accurate on what's the accuracy of what's coming out of the community, but B, making sure that you're actually focusing and seeing the most important topics and conversations, because the LLM allows that to group it together. So yeah, it's this is a really exciting time to be building a business. We're not the only people that are really leaning in here, but it's having a really big impact and changing. It's kind of changed our business, and the feedback from customers has been really positive. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be building with these tools.
Yeah. Could I nerd out a little with you? Because I'm
Sure.
curious. So I started a ghostwriting business, 10 months, 11 months now. And at the start, all the writing was pretty much done manual. AI was cool, but it was mostly useful for ideation. And now it's gotten a lot better, where it can give me a lot of good stuff when it comes to like, I prompt my CEOs a question about their company origin story, for example, or something that would become an educational post, and I get like an 8-minute voice note. Historically, I used to listen to it all, find the core story, then start writing. But now with AI, I can find as a first step a lot of the kind of, this is an idea, maybe this is an idea with like sources and everything. And from what I'm hearing, this basically changes the game like massively. So I just got a couple questions on like how it works, if you don't mind. So I'm wondering if I have a game and then I plug in Levellr. Is that the tool called Levellr? Yeah. So I plug in Levellr. Could I? Do I get like a knowledge base? Because I'm thinking you got all this data. Like, can I just like ask Discord knowledge base, like, hey, what's happened in the last 2 weeks about this? Like, can I just start speaking to it like that now?
You can start to prompt and literally ask questions about what your community is discussing.
Wow.
And that is a bit of a game changer.
Does it source it as
Um,
well? Sorry to interrupt.
yeah. So what you can then, we can, we will summarize topics and conversations, but we will also show you the specific conversations that was below that on Discord, right? So you can fact check it. We then deep link from our dashboards directly to the conversation on Discord. So if you actually wanted then to reply to that or kind of see where the conversation led on to, you can jump straight to that conversation on the
Mm.
platform. So just the knowledge that customers can now have on their community, because historically kind of data was coming to them versus being able to kind of go and dive into that data and try and noodle and to poke at it and to try and be inquisitive and see what will come out. And that's allowing for even more creativity and faster feedback loops and insights that maybe just would have been missed before. So yeah, it's pretty cool to be playing with this.
Yeah, that's sick. That's just I did not know that was already possible. So the fact that it is amazing. Sweet. So if you don't mind, I got a few quick fire questions. Just these are things that I think a studio would be thinking about, um, if you will allow it. Alrighty. So what is the fastest way to get like 1,000 engaged people in my Discord? Like if I had a mission as a community manager, it's like, hey, we need an active community yesterday. What am I doing to get like 1,000 engaged players in my Discord?
Ask, encourage, and incentivize your existing core users to bring more people into that community.
How would you incentivize? Well, would you offer? Is it in-game currency? Is there a go-to?
I mean, you've got lots of different tactics here. So yes, you can offer people V-Bucks and in-game currency. You can give people merchandise. You can
Hmm.
give them a shout out. You can, and what we're doing now is because we can see game data from Discord, we're actually connecting that to leveling. So rather than giving people XP points and ranking them for just engagement, we can actually rank and move people up for literally playing the game, which is driving more game time and bringing people back. And then when that gets really fun is when you kind of turn Discords from a separate island for conversation into a connected ecosystem where if I then rank at level 50 in Discord, I unlock an exclusive skin or something
Wow.
back in game, right? And that then creates really powerful loops because people in the game then see other users with a special sword or a special item, and they go, how do you get that? Well, I get it from Discord, and by getting to this rank, that drives more people into Discord, and then you're creating these really powerful loops.
Do you have a situation where if you can connect it to the game, is that also reverse? So if I'm like level 100 in the game, can that be connected to my Discord account and then unlock a new channel and only speak to like people above level 100?
There you go. And then you can
Wow.
also give people custom roles when they hit those ranks and hit those different levels. So it's really bringing both of those things together. Like this is what we're going to see a lot over the next kind of 12 to 24 months within gaming. I really think that Discord is going to cement itself as the kind of the core chat platform, not just where gamers go to speak about the game, but actually in game. I think we're going to start to see these things cross over a lot more. And we can build a really kind of powerful layer on top of that, where we're then driving that reward system between both the platform and the game, as well as, of course, the fact that as we start to connect kind of these user IDs together, you can start to understand the dollar values, understand how Discord users then rank and stack up in your marketing stack. So a lot of change happening here at the moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because I listened to a podcast recently where they were struggling. This was Facebook, and they were struggling to retain people on the platform. And then they couldn't get like data on it, but they figured out the best way to retain people on Facebook was like, we need to get people to 10 friends ASAP, like within a week. Then once they did that, then they got that network glue, and then they stayed and kept going rather than like, well, what's Facebook? And then see you later. And now I'm thinking in the context here, this actually helps also with the management, because let's say the base general channel is available to anyone who's got an account, let's say. But like where most of the action happens might be like after level 5 or 10. You just am thinking of an example, which would mean like moderation becomes a bit easier because like you can't really, I guess, come in, make a new account, spam. I don't know if that's an actual problem, but I'm just thinking if I was playing a game and I'm like top 100 in the world, I can go and chat with the other top 100 in the world who are on Discord. It's pretty awesome. And that would, for me, was like, well, I don't really care what's happening in this channel because that can be very busy, but it's literally a verified, yes, I'm with other people playing the game who are also good, which for me is like really powerful.
Well, that if you're intentional with levels and ranking, not only should it help with some spam and safety issues, because you can, block people from coming in and immediately causing chaos in a community by not letting them, write comments until they get to a certain level, for example. But one of the challenges with community is we want to keep people retained, but then we've got this really hardcore audience that know each other, know the slang, are talking all the time, have all of the inside information, they've got all of the context. But we want new users, and in that kind of funnel analogy, we want people to keep on coming into the community because we know that those are really valuable users. And when they come in and suddenly there are, 50 people over there that, are talking in a language that they don't know because they haven't got the context yet. And like, how do you then make that person feel comfortable? How do you then get them up to speed? And that's where levels and ranking can also really help with taking people on that journey. So it doesn't feel intimidating when you first come into a new community in a new space.
Yeah, you kind of can hide them for the thing that has, I guess, a higher learning curve to like enjoy the community. That's pretty cool. You mentioned community moderators before, and just thinking about how you got this tool now, you can have an AI. From my understanding, like you probably have a situation where one community manager is now like really powerful. Like they can probably do a lot of community management versus a year ago. I don't know if I speaking out of turn. I'm thinking like, what's the best way to find a good community manager like in today's world now that you got all these tools? Like, is it different to how people should approach it before? Like, if I'm ready to find someone who's dedicated to manage the community in Discord?
I mean, often the best community managers come out of highly engaged community members.
Yeah, but where does that go wrong? Because I feel like that can go wrong.
Well, I mean, like, any hiring process, right? You're going to take people through stages. And some of those stages aren't just interviews, they might be that you have tasks for people. So, actually the fact that people have a kind of online presence and they're part of the community and they're literally talking and engaging, you're seeing a task in real time as to whether those people are potentially capable of taking on a different role. And yes, going from being a kind of volunteer community manager or moderator to representing a business and that business's values and the way that our business thinks about the world. And then, of course, also thinking about the commercial impact and how the community needs to tie back into company goals and company OKRs. That requires kind of evolution. But we have found and we've done this with our account managers at Levellr. We've not gone and hired, typical kind of SaaS customer success people and then trade them on community. We've found incredible community managers that have worked at Blizzard and Epic and Discord and other organizations. And then we've helped skill them up on, you know, what taking customers on an incredible onboarding journey and keeping those customers happy and retained, some of those skills. And I think it's similar for that kind of community management piece is you're probably going to find better community managers are the people that actually are genuinely part of the community, care, want to be there, want to talk, want to shout about your game. And then you can help scale them up on the other pieces versus the other way around where they might lack that authenticity and just the kind of that gut feel and insight on when they should jump into conversations and where they should steer the conversations.
That's a very important point because if you just did a traditional hiring process, you would miss all of that. Like all of it. They might not even have a LinkedIn, So I guess, would you say that's just like the law now? Like just only hire from your Discord community wherever possible? Because I feel like a lot of what you said resonated, but I'm wondering why do anything else?
Well, I think the other thing that we're seeing is people's roles within gaming organizations just shifting. So as some of the kind of legacy media formats, press as social changes, these platforms are still pretty new, right? We've not had Discord experts for a very long time, and a lot of these organizations don't have experts yet. So there's definitely scope for people within gaming orgs that are passionate about how to kind of fuel engagement with their players to evolve and grow that skill set. So I think those are the kind of the two areas that you'd be looking at is, are there people within your community that could be a natural fit there? And secondly, within your own organization, thinking about, well, let's be really clear around where our conversation with our players is now going to take place. And is Discord a part of that? And if the answer is yes, and if you're then going to lean in, who within the team could potentially go and learn and kind of grow into that already brings that knowledge of your business and your players and already has some of that connection with them.
Yeah, I think that understanding of the players and the game first before all the other stuff is like really important. It's like when you're hiring, I guess, someone for a new role, usually if it's something which is easily trainable, then the only thing you're really looking at is, are they kind and their mindset, right? Because the rest is easily trainable. So I think there's something similar here.
Right.
Because I feel like, because you have such a new product, you've probably had to pitch and explain this over and over again to studios. And then some obviously become clients, but then some don't. I'm wondering, when you get the questions like, right, what is this worth to me? What's my ROI going to be? Isn't it hard to give a direct answer right now? Like we had that number before of like 6x Discord user. I'm like, okay, but then how many resources am I going to put in or whatnot? Like, is this a problem? Like kind of actually proving the ROI right now, or is it pretty much solved?
I mean, ultimately, every business wants to have a clear site of attribution and where dollars should be spent and where they should be focusing. And, Discord haven't answered that question directly today. And maybe it's not their job to do that as a platform, but it's definitely something that we have focus on a lot. And we can start to do that because, we have the tools to be able to connect Discord user IDs to, game user IDs, and then we can start to understand what those dollar values are, and we can start to understand the value of those users in our stack, and that's really powerful. I think, funnily enough, where if we don't end up working with customers, it's kind of two reasons. A connection between kind of community and the rest of the organization not being strong enough yet. And this is changing, right? And I think organizations are realizing how valuable that insight is, but they've not always been able to trust the data. And actually, typically, Harry, we're working with, community team are one of our core set of users, but equally so are product and kind of insight and experience teams and marketing teams, because they're now accessing data that they couldn't necessarily get before. So sometimes when those things aren't connected up as much, and that kind of leads into the second one, which is just where those businesses are investing. And one of my kind of, I suppose, bugbears sometimes uh, with some of the pushback is, well, Discord is where our highly engaged players are. They're already spending money, so we need to focus on other areas. But that is where long-term spending happens. And that's ultimately where you want to get as many of your users to as possible. So you need to learn from those users how you get other people there and how you get other people on that journey. I think sometimes there's such a focus on user acquisition that you forget that you've already done that really successfully with a percentage of your players, and they're over there. So how do you lean into that to then create that flywheel and get more people into that long-term spending and that long-term fandom? And look, if you neglect and you don't do it in there, then you risk losing the most important thing to your business.
Common saying, right? Retaining a client is worth a lot more than a new client. And I guess in gaming, I think mobile games, that makes a lot of sense. But maybe with a PC game, if you've got a good DLC or future games that they can buy in the future, then again, also makes sense. Is there a fear here? Because I actually had a chat with some people from EA and some other companies who are like part of MMOs specifically, like really big games where the community is like quite passionate and actually scared. Like some of them, like on purpose, don't do anything public because they receive backlash before, kind of directly, whether it be on Twitter or they try to find them on LinkedIn. And Discord is, or I guess like you said, it's a direct way. Is that a fear that is kind of based in truth? Like, have you seen that with any of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one. And we're also working with some quite large consumer brands, and it certainly comes up kind of outside of gaming more. But there are still some very large publishers that don't own their own Discord communities. And I've always found that response of, well, we're scared of what's going to come out as a really interesting one, because users and players will go and speak about that anyway, right? They can literally go and shout about that on Twitter, or they can spin up their own Discord community and shout about that. And you then, as the business and the brand, have no way to respond to, shape, and be a part of that conversation because you've not created that two-way dialogue. So why would you want people out shouting about it um, when you can't have any impact on that? Versus, you know, people are going to talk, right? Like, just be real about, users, and hey, it's better to have people complaining about something than not having people complaining at all. There's people that are passionate and they want you to be better. So be better by being part of that conversation and letting them talk and listening and improving from that, versus, we're scared of that because they'll just go and do that anyway. And look, we do see sometimes customers say, we don't necessarily want to own our own community because, we think that players will be more transparent and they'll be more real if they're talking in a
Is that
kind of
true?
creator community versus ours. Um, I mean, there's two ways of going around this. Like, people are going to set up creator communities anyway, right? If you type Fortnite into Discord, there's over 1,500 communities. But if the business doesn't own their community, then they can't they can't share those real-time updates and announcements and the feedback that that community wants. And, you should be able to encourage them to then go, and if they want to speak somewhere else as well, that's great. But then not being able to have that direct feedback and
Yeah, you
dialogue.
get both, right? Like it's not an
Right,
argument.
right.
Yeah, sweet. Thinking now going forward, like what do you see changing? Like in the last 6 months already, it's changed in the terms of, I guess, the unwieldy nature of managing all the data is now becoming easier with AI. But how do you see Discord communities playing out in the future? Like the fact that you said there's massive publishers who don't own their communities, and that's still the case given our conversation. For me, blows my mind because there's like so much money sloshing around. Maybe dedicate a little bit to get the Discord in order. But how do you see the I guess Discord playing a role in games in over the next few years?
Well, look, I think this is a really interesting and pivotal time for the industry where things are having to change because there are those user acquisition bottlenecks. There's so much content out there. I think there was 19,000 games on Steam last year, 5,000 console games launched. There's now 700,000 games, mobile games on iOS and Android combined. And that doesn't even bring into the fact that 60% of game time is from titles that are 5 years or older. So you're not only competing with so much new content, you're competing with old. And by the way, that last stat, that 60% of playtime from games 5 years and older, I mean, literally feeds into this piece here, right? Like there is switching costs as players. And so your goal as a business has to be to keep those players and keep them playing over and over and over again. I mean, look at the success and the strength of communities like RuneScape that are still thriving so many years on. And that is combined with, the shifting sands around kind of the UA piece and moving to a post-cookie world and advertising becoming more expensive and, the kind of some of the rev share challenges on platforms unnamed. So this, I think, is really putting the spotlight on, hey, when we get a new user, we have got to hold on to them for dear life. That hasn't necessarily always been there. So I think community is starting to shift in the mindset of these organizations. People are starting to see it as kind of core and core from a commercial point of view and really thinking about how it connects to business goals and commercial goals, which often it hasn't. So that's then feeding into the growth of platforms like Discord and investment there. I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is businesses and games getting much smarter, really like connecting that community to the game and the game to the community and making it part of a kind of an ecosystem where purchasing is rewarded on both platforms and engagement and playtime is rewarded on both platforms, and you can unlock things in game from things done in Discord and vice versa. Because I think the industry has realized that you've got to go and be part of the conversation where the conversation is taking place. You can't own all of this, and right now that conversation happens on Discord. That's where the players are. That's where your gamers are. So how are you going to add value to that conversation and make people want to be a part of it with you?
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned RuneScape, it's a game I've put, I think, 370 days of my life, something stupid. So, like, every time you log in, it tells you've played this amount of time. I'm like, oh my god.
And they are a great example of they've got their own communities where they're running events. They've got leveling systems set up. People are coming in and directly sharing feedback. They're asking for that. They've built forums around it. But there's also over 100 communities for different niches of RuneScape that creators have gone and set up, and they
Yeah,
encourage that. So I think they're a really good example of we've got our own space, but also if you also want to go and have those other conversations, that's cool. I think the other thing that we're then trying to fix for publishers and studios is how do you then add value to those creator communities that are currently dark spaces, right, for you as a business, and how do we also shine a light on what's happening in there? Because there's hundreds of those spaces, and it's very hard to get those insights out. And so there's a really exciting opportunity around that whole creator ecosystem as well.
are you saying you can extract the data without like owning the Discord?
So we're actually, increasingly bringing brand owners and IP holders into creator communities. Because more often than not, those creators are really excited about having a relationship with that business and brand, right? Like, I can now actually get you giving amazing stuff to my community, not just the insights and announcements and updates, but rewarding the community for stuff and giving us exclusives. And that's great. But it's also still our creator space. So you're adding value, but you're not owning this. But with some of our engagement software and tools where we can, again, connect gameplay to leveling and rank people up and badge people. Communities love that, right? Communities is, super fans want to kind of bang the chest and show that they're the biggest super fan. And we can then add that value. And that then allows kind of customers to get a better understanding of kind of the insights and engagement within those communities as well. So there's a really kind of clear and value share between the creator and the IP holder.
Awesome. Oh, very cool. To wrap up here, if there's one thing you could tell that game publisher, that person working in the game publishing who kind of wants to do this, but they can't because they don't have the buy-in or it's just not prioritized right now, like, what would you say to that person to kind of help them, guide them on their next step?
Understand why. Why community? Right. It's very easy because other people are doing it to think that that's the thing that you should do. But a community is not for Christmas. Like, you can't just spin this up and then let it run. You have to be a gentle hand and guide for that community for its existence. And that requires you being clear on kind of why and the journey that you want to take that community on. And if you've got that in place, the next challenge may be proving the value and the ROI internally of why you should go on that journey. And that's when you call Levellr.
Hey, amazing. Sweet. And regarding next steps, so if anyone wanted to reach out, what's the best way to reach out to you, Tom?
Head to the Levellr website, www.levellr.com. More info on us there, and you can check out the product and have a bit of a play if it seems relevant. Just drop us a line there and we'll reach out for a chat.
Nice. And Levellr is spelled Levellr, or you can just search, I'm guessing, Tom Gayner on LinkedIn, and you can see the profile there. And because you actually post quite a bit, which is nice. You see, get some updates.
Yeah, feel free to connect. We're talking a lot about community. This is really fast moving at the moment, and Discord is fast moving and it's hard to keep up on all of that information. So, we've got a community newsletter in place and sharing lots of updates, and myself and wider team members are sharing stuff on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out and we can share more.
Fantastic. Tom, anything you want to leave people with?
2025 is the year of community. Lean in, and hopefully we can go on that journey with you.
Sweet. Amazing. What's the next event you're going to? I'm curious.
GDC.
Of course. Yeah. Big old GDC. Amazing. Lovely. Tom, it's been a pleasure. And everyone at home, thanks so much. If you listen to the whole thing, maybe like, maybe subscribe, and share with a friend or someone on Discord. Alrighty. Goodbye, everyone.